This month, we've seen Democratic presidential candidates offer climate action plans and debate the issue. What's your perspective on these plans? What would you include in a national plan? And what about a carbon fee and dividend, for example?
The Green New Deal proposal that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Markey of Massachusetts put forward is the first time that we've actually had legislation proposed that's of a scale commensurate with the problem that we face. It's as yet not completely formed, and people are working hard to try and figure out precisely what shape it should take, and people should join in that effort. But its basic outline is clear. We need to move very quickly to decarbonize our society. The goals that people are talking about are a massive reduction in carbon emissions by 2030. To move at that pace, we've got to change a lot of other things because we live in a country with enormous inequality and enormous insecurity, and those insecurities are one of the things that make it very difficult to make change at the pace we need to make change because people feel as if they can't risk change because if anything goes wrong, they lose their job, they lose their home, they can't get education, whatever it is. Therefore, things like a federal job guarantee for anybody who wants to work in this transformation are really important. That's precisely what FDR did with the original New Deal in the 1930s. We now think of it as the most normal, straightforward, obvious thing to have done. But of course, at the time, everybody was like, oh, that's radical. You can't do that. We need to move fast. And so those are things that will help. I do think that a price on carbon, there's no reason not to have it. There's no intellectual reason not to have it. It's something I've been talking about for a very long time. I also think at this point, given how long we've waited, expecting it to do the job by itself is folly. 30 years ago, yeah, it would have made by itself, as I said, an enormous difference. Now it has to be, if we're going to do it, it has to be aggressively coupled with huge support for renewable energy, and it has to be coupled maybe most crucially with an all-out effort to keep carbon in the ground. One of the best things that's happened out of this democratic cycle is the strong agreement across the board of all candidates that there'll be no more dry mining or drilling on public lands in this country, most of them saying that they would ban fracking to the extent that it was possible to do it across America, that they would end our rise of this sort of energy superpower when it comes to coal and oil and gas, and instead take advantage of the sun and the wind that wash across this continent every day.
Many of us in Houston worry we could become another Detroit or Philadelphia if city leaders don't diversify out of oil. You wrote an interesting article last April in the New York Review of Books saying the oil industry is likely to decline, and I should say oil stock prices have been going down for 2 years. You wrote that demand for fossil fuels will stop growing because of financial markets, cheaper renewables, and the lower price of sunshine. Could you reflect on that?
Sure. If you're the fossil fuel industry, you face two enormous challenges. One, people are waking up to the fact that your product is destroying the planet. So that's a problem, okay? In the same way that tobacco companies, eventually people were waking up to the fact that cigarettes were killing people, and so that was a big problem for Philip Morris, okay? The second problem that Philip Morris didn't face was that fossil fuel industry does, is that there are now hundreds of thousands, millions of smart people who are quickly developing a superior product to the one that you produce. Sun and wind are not only don't destroy the planet, they also turn out to be better in all kinds of other ways. For instance, I don't know how many people in here have yet driven an electric car, but if you're a car lover, an electric car just turns out to be way better than the one you're driving now. If you're really into these sort of things, it accelerates more quickly. It has no moving parts. You don't have to go service it all the time. Look, we'd be better off building lots of transit and figuring out how to walk and bike the places we need to go. But the other thing that should scare the oil industry is people are now, in this country to some degree, but in China and India to an enormous degree, are buying electric vehicles that will never take a drop of oil to make them run. So for a place like, the challenge for a place like Houston is the same challenge that you run if you have a big portfolio or endowment of stocks. You got to figure out where the future lies and move as aggressively in that direction as you can before kind of time catches up with you. More and more and more, smart money is headed in the other direction. And so you can see the oil companies beginning to kind of just vestigially sense this, if you watch the advertisements, you would think that Exxon was an algae biofuel company that happened to occasionally also have an oil well. Of course, 98% of their investment is still going into their core business. That's a huge trap for them. The example of short-termism, and so Houston would be, this industry would be well advised to move much more aggressively and nimbly. It's possible they may have waited too long. It seems to me that they had the warning 30 years ago. Exxon and other companies knew before anybody else what was going to happen. Instead of taking that and seizing the moment to kind of own the energy future, they did their best to make sure that future never came to pass. For a few years, it resulted in great profits. Now it results in great peril. Houston will have to figure out, how to navigate that going forward.
I have an emotional question, Bill. A young person issued a Facebook post from 350.org just a couple of weeks ago talking about climate anxiety. The climate crisis is emotionally overwhelming and depressing. Was there a time you had to reckon emotionally with the climate crisis?
Sure. I was thinking about this the other day, actually, when I was talking with Greta, because it's relatively rare. Well, not so much anymore, but for a long time it was rare to meet other people who had heard the news about climate change, read the science, and had it sort of overturn their lives, had made it impossible to sort of go back to thinking about the world in the same way. And clearly that happened to her, as it now happens to a fair number of young people. One of the hard parts about being early to this was that when I was going through that, there was almost nobody else who was thinking the same way. So I had to also kind of wonder if I was crazy, too, to be this worried about it, because nobody else was, and Brian or Sarah or many others here might agree with me, the antidote to that kind of despair and anxiety generally is engagement. It feels less bad. In fact, sometimes it feels good to be engaged in the fight to do something about it. Oddly, some of the times, much to my surprise, considering sort of where I came from and who I am and things, I've found myself in jail a good deal of the, on many occasions in the last while. And oddly, it's sometimes been a strangely comforting sensation to feel as if you were in the place you were supposed to be. I can't explain it more than that. It's not a good thing. Young people in particular should not go off and try to go to jail and whatever, and I don't try to. There are times when it just seems impossible not to. I found myself in jail this summer in upstate New York after a demonstration about immigration and climate, because I just couldn't take anymore the pictures from the southern border and the understanding that so much of this was driven now by what we'd done to the world's environment and made it impossible for people to farm where they grew up. So of course they were on the move. Who would not be? What choice do people have? And oddly, it felt correct somehow to be in the basement of the jail, shackled at the ankle to a U-bolt in the floor. I'm rambling. Action is the antidote to despair. Engagement of all kinds is the way to deal with those, I think, those kind of feelings. And it's a good thing that it also happens to be the way that we might make some progress at the same time. So engage. This is fun, this is good talk to get to give, because y'all, we're not talking about something abstract right at the moment. We're talking about something that's happening 5 days hence at noon on the steps of City Hall. So you can figure out, whether or not it's worth your time to be there.
And one last question, Bill. You've attracted more young people to our events than the last 50. What career advice do you like to offer?
Well, I don't like to offer. I hate telling anyone what to do about anything, but now I spend all my time telling everybody what to do about things. So the first thing to be said is, one of the reasons that we need to be doing what we're doing now is so that young people actually get to choose careers. Because otherwise, no matter what good career people are training for now, 30 or 40 years from now, the career they're going to be engaged in is emergency response to impossible conditions, okay? That's going to be basically, survival will be people's career, okay? That's bad. That should not be what people, that's not what we spent our lives doing, and it shouldn't be what other people have to. So that's a reason we fight right now. And I guess what I always tell people who want career advice is, do the thing that you're good at for work, because the climate situation is so large. It's not even really an issue. It's a lens through which to understand the world, okay? So whatever it is you're good at can be brought to bear. We need climate accountants, and we need, carbon accountants. We need theologians who understand this seriously. We need psychologists and psychiatrists who can deal with the kind of traumas, the PTSD that's very real. Think about the people who just lived through that hurricane in the Bahamas. Try to imagine what their sense of stability and self in the world is right now. We need, obviously, scientists and engineers, but we also need economists and political policy people. We need, whatever career it is you can do can be made to help here. But pick a career that doesn't require you to work 70 hours a week, because we mostly need people being citizens. And citizenship happens after hours and on weekends, okay? Look at Sarah. She works as developing wind projects during the day, so that's really good. But it's at least as important that when the day's work is done, the paid work is done, she's out organizing people to come together as citizens. Citizenship is the thing that we kind of lost track of, in a way, as we built this kind of hyper-individualist, super-consumer kind of world that we're in. And that kind of citizenship, that kind of solidarity, that's what will save us if anything does. So it takes some time, and it takes some energy. And you can't do it if all you're doing is work around the clock. So that's my career advice. There you are.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, brother.